On today's World Insight with Tin Wei, two rivals to be the next British Prime Minister go toe-to-toe in a televised debate. Who will lead the UK beyond Brexit? And the world's young scientists laid the groundwork for scientific advances. A panel discussion on the future of progress through science.
That science can contribute and make a huge difference and actually bring people together and solve problems.
Here's our host, Tin Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight live on CGTN. Let's begin in Britain, where the race to be the next Prime Minister is on the last sprint. On Tuesday, the last two candidates standing, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt, took part in a heated televised debate. Brexit is the biggest challenge facing them, while special relationship with the US was tested recently. Take a look.
The contest to be the next leader of the UK's governing Conservative Party and the next British Prime Minister has come down to the final two, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt. Mr. Johnson still the front-runner, with a formidable lead in the last ballots. On Tuesday night, the two men traded verbal blows, going head-to-head in a televised debate over which of them is more likely to deliver a successful exit from the European Union. Mr. Johnson said Britain living on schedule, with or without a divorce deal with the EU, is a do-or-die issue. For his part, Mr. Hunt said he would be prepared to delay the departure for a short time to win approval of a deal on withdrawal terms. Brexit Day has been postponed twice before and currently is scheduled for October 31.
You know, someone who's campaigned for Brexit and who believes in it and who has a plan to unite this country and who has long experience of beating the Labour left, I believe I'm the right person to unleash on this project, and I hope I can count on your support.
Because I appeal not just to those who already vote Conservative, but those we need to win. And to those watching at home, I'll be your Prime Minister, whoever you vote for, as I bring together our amazing United Kingdom.
About 160,000 Conservative Party members are eligible to vote for the party leader who will succeed Prime Minister Theresa May. The winner will be announced on July 23. Mrs. May announced she would step down about 2 months ago after failing to deliver Britain's exit from the European Union, 3 years after the 2016 Brexit referendum. Brexit is the biggest challenge facing Mrs. May's successor, but both Johnson and Hunt have also been drawn into a rare diplomatic row with the UK's close ally, the US. Last weekend, a British tabloid reported the UK ambassador to Washington has called the Trump administration dysfunctional, clumsy, and inept in a leaked cable message. The leak triggered a wave of angry tweets from President Trump. He attacked Mrs. May, criticizing her handling of Brexit and saying she disregarded his advice. The British ambassador to the US resigned today, but it's not yet clear how much damage the leaked cable did to the special relationship between Downing Street and the White House.
A lot of things in transition. So who will be the Prime Minister of the UK? And how is he likely to deal with the important relationships, including that with Washington? Joining us, let's go to our panelists. At Durham, Britain, we have Tom Brooks, who is a professor of the School of Government and International Affairs at Durham University. In Washington, D.C., Garrett Martin, professorial lecturer of the School of International Service from the American University. Last but not least, at Beijing studio, we have Wang Yiwei, Jean Monnet Chair Professor and Director of the Center for European Studies, Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Go to you first, Professor Brooks. How should we understand the latest debate, and particularly at the time when relationship Downing Street, Washington in test?
Wow. Well, I think that in the debate last night, each played to their strengths. Boris Johnson seems to just believe he'll deliver Brexit because he has got the right warm, optimistic personality or outlook, and he seems to think that will somehow be enough. It was enough to energize his supporters. It didn't convince anyone who was not. Jeremy Hunt has more appeal amongst the British public. If there had been a head-to-head with him and other parties, current polls show that Hunt would have a large majority. He played to that strength as well. Although, unfortunately, it's not for him. Unfortunately, the general public is not voting in that contest. I think Boris did the better of the two in terms of energizing their supporters, although Hunt has been making up ground. I think it will be a closer contest than many predicted. In terms of that second part of your question about relations with the United States, there I did think that Jeremy Hunt had the right view, which it should be for the British Prime Minister to be choosing who is our ambassador, and we should not be taking lessons from the White House. Boris Johnson refused to say whether or not he would support the British ambassador, and apparently that refusal is what led to the British ambassador choosing to resign today. I think that it is a very big problem for multiple reasons. One, that we
we'll leave some of the reasons for later discussion. Let's also have Professor Martin to speak here, just to have a fair share of the discussion as well. Professor Martin, from your perspective in Washington, what do you make of the latest spat in terms of the rhetoric toward President Trump by a British ambassador to Washington? What does it really say about the real nature of this relationship?
Well, I think it's certainly spectacular. It's certainly embarrassing. I think it's a difficult position for any diplomat, any ambassador, when their confidential analysis is revealed in the press. I think that's the biggest phobia for any ambassador. But that being said, I'm not sure in the long run this will be so significant. Yes, I think it's spectacular, but we're going to have a crowded political agenda in the coming months, and specifically for Donald Trump, I'm going to imagine that the 2020 presidential campaign is going to dominate his attention. So yes, I think it's temporarily a problem for the special relationship, but in the long run, I don't think this is so important.
But Professor Martin, we shouldn't forget the fact that President Trump takes a lot of things very personally, and certainly he remembers the negative comments coming from the others toward him or his team. So for a president who is quite much in his own world, how much do you think this issue is likely to have an impact on the atmosphere, at least between Washington and the Downing Street? Mr. Martin.
Well, I think that's difficult to predict, because we've seen, as you rightly point out, we've seen Mr. Trump to be somewhat mercurial and somewhat volatile and changing his affections. I mean, I remember for a while he seemed to have this bromance, this close friendship with Mr. Macron. That didn't prevent that from rapidly souring afterwards. So I think it'll be interesting to see, let's say, if Boris Johnson, who is a likely next prime minister, on the surface has a good relationship with Donald Trump. So that could undo the damage. And also, as you mentioned, the ambassador resigned, so there will be a new person very soon.
Okay. Certainly, any ambassador, when they are trying to send the message home, it should not be revealed to the public, because there will be a lot of drama also in those messages. But Professor Wang, that is revealed, that was revealed. That's why the overall drama began. So what does it say, even from this, let's just say, a specific official message or from ambassador to the Downing Street about Washington today? What does that say about this nature of relationship from the third party's perspective?
Firstly, this is not the first case that something in a transition or even in the chaos of the British government. The previous time, actually, this about the Huawei National Security Review Committee also released some document and make the defense minister also resigned. So that's the first scenario. Secondly, the so-called the special relationship between the UK and the US actually is not so special anymore. And many complaints about President Trump. I think the ambassador's message, I think, represents not his own personal view, but even many other ambassadors in Washington, D.C. also have a similar concern and complaints about that. So that's the difficult time, not just for the UK and the United States, but also European countries' relations with Washington as well.
Okay, so Professor Brooks, if you think about what the UK needs right now, I guess as much friendship as possible from all over the world, as much support as possible from all over the world, as it's going through one of the most difficult parts of its history in recent years with possibility of Brexit, and also getting ever rather deteriorating relationship with the EU. So, Professor Brooks, do you think Washington is providing the Downing Street with the kind of support that the latter would desire?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, as someone, I grew up in the United States before moving to the UK about 20 years ago. We never really heard much about a special relationship with the United Kingdom. The president would typically speak to the leader of Canada or other countries first before going to Britain. Yet it's been very much in the British mindset that particularly on the Conservative Party centre-right, feel a particular affection towards the United States, think that there's some special alignment between the two. I think at the moment they've really misjudged Trump. He's not only is he hard to predict, but Trump is also a protectionist. That he's been vowing to put America first and not do trade deals that will benefit other countries more. He was going to focus more on the United States. So I think that they're looking towards America in this way to get a more rosy deal was never going to work. Theresa May being the first foreign leader to visit him, bringing him over for a banquet with the Queen and state visits, all these things have come to nothing well before this latest embarrassment, which I think will just is just another step in the wrong direction for them. And really what the British government should be doing is looking somewhere else, and maybe to China, where there's been ever-increasing improved relations between the two on issues around Huawei, which one of your commenters already mentioned, and other in the stock exchange link between the city and Shanghai as well. I think it is a place that'll be far more fruitful for the UK to go down than America. So it seems that
Professor Brooks is trying to say the UK has other options. China, of course, is only one of those examples. On the other hand, do you think Washington really cares about what's going on in Downing Street much anymore, given the fact that Downing Street might not necessarily matter that much on the power map of the world at the moment?
Well, I think that's certainly a concern. I mean, first of all, in a broader sense, I think the Trump administration has not always been very friendly towards its European allies, full stop. So I think there's that broader context. Secondly, also, I wouldn't make a distinction, though. There is a Trump administration, but you also have the broader Washington establishment. So even though when you have these bad atmospherics between the White House and Downing Street, you still have a history of deeper ties beneath the surface between UK officials and American officials. So I think, for instance, in particular, if you think about intelligence, counterterrorism cooperation, all of those are still deeply entrenched. So I think you have to be careful of not being too obsessed by the high-level atmospherics and forget the rest.
On the other hand, though, Professor Martin, if I could, how much do you think, really, the United States would matter to the UK now when it comes to credibility, value, and also soft power as a result of this current administration in the White House? As we know, since the Second World War, many of the developed economies, especially U.S. allies, are bound to the United States with a very strong, what they call, value system. Do you think that is really still the case if you look back over the past 2 to 3 years, sir?
Well, I think it's certainly the transatlantic partnership has certainly taken some blows in recent years. Now, I think, again, to be fair, if you take the long view, there have been previous major tensions, spats, disputes before. So I think I would not underestimate the resilience of the transatlantic partnership, and in particular,
what kind of tensions you were talking about?
Well, I think, for instance, you have had tensions over NATO for years. You've had tensions over trade for years before. So some of it is not entirely new. I think the tone of the Trump administration is certainly more virulent. But to come back to your original point, I think the big question when Brexit happens, and again, that's a big question mark, For the UK, it's going to be difficult and important for it to try and reinvent, to find its status. And that could be whether through NATO, through the United States, through partnerships with other countries. So I think that's going to be trying for the UK, whether Washington is supportive or not. I think this is going to be a difficult transition period for the UK.
What does it mean to the others, China included, since Professor Brooks talked about China-UK possibilities on financial cooperation and on new technologies, but both of these areas could be controversial to the current White House right now. Professor Wang, what do you make of these possibilities?
I think after Brexit, or even whether it's possible or not, UK definitely need Chinese market. And China also need UK, because when China's open reforms, more focus on the high-level financial market reform, I think the UK is very professional in the RMB internationalization and of the soft power, I think. That's the reason I think Shanghai and the London Stock Exchange have then integrate. And but to be frankly, they also suffered of the security concern, the alliance with the United States, US airplane, everything with the so-called security as umbrella. The Huawei cases. But the UK actually tried to keep the balance, I think, between the traditional relations with the United States and the new emerging market like China.
But how? That's an interesting question, isn't it, Professor Brooks? I mean, of course, the debate we see on Tuesday still does not necessarily reflect much about that. But as we all know, if the new Prime Minister comes into office and really think about the economic agenda in the near future, that one about the relationship and the balance he has to keep between the United States, a traditional ally, and the new possibilities of relationship certainly will be on top of the agenda. How do you think skillfully a Prime Minister should handle that? Is Prime Minister May a good example? Or things are actually changing very fast, and the new Prime Minister has to set his own path, in a way, to deal with the issue?
Well, Theresa May had a lot of problems during her time, most of it consumed by Brexit. Was unable to get a majority for her plan, and during that time wasn't really able to do much of any real, genuine significance across a large number of fronts. The problem for the next Prime Minister, whether it's Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt, is that it's the same MPs in Parliament. So the numbers haven't changed. They do not have more for going for a possible no-deal Brexit. In fact, there's every sign that that would be prevented. There are hopes so they're going to be in a very constrained position in what they can do, and I think they don't have much room to, they've thrown everything at the Americans to woo them with a state visits, being the first foreign leader over there, etc., and it's gotten them absolutely nowhere. I think they're not going to be able to go improve that and move towards any type of New Deal with any speed at the moment, given the current crisis. There is opportunity, possibly with China, because that's been something that they've been working on for some time. There has been progress there. It's one of the few, I think, real successes that the current administration has been able to fulfill. But the problem is that the government right now isn't able to stand up to White House. It isn't able to get a majority. It can't pass bills. It is almost certainly going to be facing a vote of no confidence as soon as the new Prime Minister is in. I think we're going to be at a general election very soon. And so whoever is Prime Minister may not be Prime Minister for very long.
Right. Very interesting situation over there. So, Professor Wang, if China is looking at the situation, everybody is thinking about geopolitics these days. Everybody is thinking about the opportunities seeking out of crisis. So what kind of opportunities, what kind of potential, Professor Wang, does China see, and how optimistic or pragmatic China should be?
First, definitely China support united Europe. UK cannot separate from Europe. Otherwise, you'll be separate yourself. That's a dilemma. There's no United Kingdom, but a separate kingdom. So we hope that the integration of the European market will be contribute to the Euro-Asia mutual connectivity with China. So that reason, the UK also take a leading role in the signing many MOU, the third-party market exploration, also the financial cooperation, even finance the China-Pakistan corridor with Chinese government to build the mutual connectivity, land and sea, and also even I think internet. So I think that China is a dramatic change from the traditional continental civilization to the maritime civilization, from the agricultural civilization to the industrial and the information civilization, and also from the regional to the global civilization. In all these three major transformations, UK still be the very, I think, teacher, even close partner for Chinese transformation.
But Professor Wang, also one has to be pragmatic, isn't it? If you would look at the traditional ally relationship between the UK and the United States, and particularly now the US quite nervous about the rise of China, how much do you expect that what you have just said would come into realization, particularly in near term?
Well, China-US rivalry is more about the future norms and like 5G, and it's not just as an excuse of the security. I think the UK can play some role in bridging the gaps between China and the United States as the former dominant power in the world.
Professor Martin, is the role of the UK being recognized or realized, as the other two guests from the UK and China been talking about, by Washington, or at least by the current White House? Once again, the question really is about whether Washington cared that much about the Downing Street.
Well, certainly they haven't always shown signs that they do for the moment. But again, if you're focusing in particular on the White House, but I want to echo a few points here. First, I agree with Professor Brooks that whoever's the next prime minister is going to face a lot of internal challenges before they can focus on the big, important geopolitical questions that have just been discussed. Any next prime minister is going to try to restore unity in a very divided country, in a very divided Conservative Party. So that's number one, very limited margin of maneuver. Secondly, I think there is a broader question for the UK and for Europe in general of how do they place themselves within that broader competition between Beijing and Washington. I think for the moment the Europeans, and the UK included, have tried to sort of draw a middle ground. They don't want to offend the United States, but they also continue to want to have investments and partnerships with China. But they don't want to be forced into making a choice. But if the US-China competition escalates, Europe and the UK may have to make that choice, which they don't want to make.
Very interesting. As we see the election is upcoming, Professor Brooks, do you expect foreign affairs issues, international relations to come up in the discussion and debate? Will those agenda be able to set to a certain extent the favorable choices that voters likely to make?
Typically, most elections focus on domestic issues, and I think that that will, to a large degree, still play out. As much as I talk a lot about Brexit, a lot of people interested in politics in Britain talk about Brexit, a lot of voters do too. Most people are now a bit tired of it. Most of the country is actually swinging slightly towards Remain and not leaving Europe after all. But I think that what will be the big thing here is who can give a bigger vision, not just in terms of the Brexit or not Brexit scenario, but who will deliver on hospitals, which have been having problems, education, schools, and other things. I think that foreign policy issues on the whole will probably be in the background to Brexit and these bigger domestic concerns that have been neglected for a while.
Tom Brooks, Garrett Martin, Wang Yiwei, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you for sharing your insights. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Still to come on our program.